Anyway, I have not dealt with material culture. I'm not trained as a historian of material culture, but I am interested in the physical aspects of the life of people that I study, and since I do not study people of much wealth, I've always wondered about what can we learn about the lives, possessions, environment of ordinary people. Much of the literature, and again, Paula has given us an outline, and seems to be changing a little bit, but much of the literature about material culture and consumption in early modern Europe or early modern period is based on or discusses the consumption patterns and material possessions of those of means. And it's dictated predominantly by the kind of sources that we have, whether these are the inventories attached to wills or wills themselves, various other lists, inventories of sequestered materials by the Inquisition and things like that. Generally, it tends to skew the sources tend to skew our knowledge into the area of those of means. So, visiting museums and thinking about objects I see in museums, I always wonder about the possessions of those of very little means, because they would not be preserved, they would not survive. And one thing that struck me actually this year when I was in Poland, I went to a very small folk museum in the town of Brześć, and there was a little table, wooden table, and 3 stools from a peasant hut, and and it struck me that they look exactly like the stools that we see in Bruegel's paintings. And one of the things that made me think about that, maybe if we want to learn about the physical aspects of people with little or no means, is to look at some of the artifacts from folk museums in the world. The wooden spoons that obviously no one would preserve, the wooden bowls that people would eat from, the stools that were around with 3 legs and very short, and that again very similar to the famous Peter Bruegel's painting of the peasant wedding. But also in terms of these are obviously anachronistic and documents, artifacts, but also to some extent when I've been working on these criminal records, I've realized that some of that may allow us to understand the physicality, the aspect of people, of poorer people. Obviously they steal from those who have things, but there are descriptions of how they get into houses, or at least they tell us what they steal to sell, or what they steal out of desire to possess. So we may perhaps learn something about their patterns of desires of possessions. And I'll leave it up to you to decide, and up for discussion. Let me say a few words about this document. The focus of the session will be this decree of the Lithuanian Tribunal concerning the Jews of Brześć from 1719. I won't go into the details of the legal system in Poland. If you want to, I discussed it in this room 2 years ago, but I'll just say a few things what it is. The Lithuanian Tribunal was the court of highest instance for the Lithuanian part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. From 1566, there were, and formally 1569, there were 2 parallel legal systems in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, one for the eastern, more or less, we can divide it, part, the Lithuanian part of the Commonwealth, and one for the so-called crown. The Lithuanian Tribunal was created 3 years after the Crown Tribunal in the Crown Tribunal was created in 1578, the Lithuanian Tribunals 3 years later in 1581. And again, it was to cover the Great Duchy of Lithuania. The whole creation of these tribunals is related to the deterioration of the royal power and the taking of the legal authority from the king as the actor of highest instance to the court, essentially run by the nobles. Both tribunals they were essentially highest instance appeals courts and dealt with appeals from the lower instance courts, which were very complicated land courts, castle courts, or sądy and Adam and Ted, I hope it, podkomorskie chamber courts. They dealt with issues related to the nobility, but they also dealt with these complicated issues of, and they would be called mixed fori, of mixed forums, I guess, fori, and that concerned certainly Jews and religious cases in Poland, religious transgressions, apostasies, sacrilege, this kind of trials were tried in lay courts, not in church courts. So, and these would be the courts where these kinds of trials would end up. This case is our final document, and if you read it, you could hear, because the Jews were asked to come and they don't come to the court, and so this is finally okay. Fair enough. This is our decree. This is what we're doing here. The case involves of three actors: the clergy, the Jews, and obviously to some extent the nobility, or rather the dead woman who was Lady Poche, the wife of a treasurer of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. In this case, these two Jews who are main actors, but also the whole Jewish community, Wolf Yewłowicz and his son Israel Wolfowicz, committed the crime, and I'll get to the text in a moment. What kind of crime? But because they escaped and refused to take responsibility, the whole Jewish community of the city of Brześć was brought to justice and charged with the crime in some ways, so that they would pay the expenses, the legal expenses, and the losses incurred during the robbery. That was the church robbery here. About documents and robberies. This document, although very unique to some extent, does illustrate a broader phenomenon of attitudes towards material goods in pre-modern period, and I'm not sure whether early modern period, whether it's a pre-modern phenomenon or whether it's an early modern phenomenon, especially the transmission of clothing, of reuse of materials and things like that. It is not representative of Jewish criminal activity in early modern Poland, although we do have cases of Jews robbing churches, and we do have Jews involved in other robberies, other crimes. Jews do appear almost always, not always, but almost always, involved in cases of church robberies as the liquidators of stolen properties, and we'll get to it in a moment. But I haven't found documents that would deal with the robbery of tombs, or getting, disassembling bodies and taking clothes or things. So this is in some way very unusual, both for general robberies of churches and for the involvement of Jews in this type of crimes. Churches were perhaps the most public spaces in which wealth was visible to people. Obviously, wealth was present in the houses of the magnates, nobles, obviously, and in the king's court, but it was the churches that were the most open and most places with most access in which wealth was displayed, and therefore we do have a lot of instances of robberies. We do have a few instances of robberies of synagogues, and if I have time, I might even translate one of the cases for the website, but there are relatively few. We also have almost none in terms of robberies of Protestant churches, and I'm not sure whether they were so stripped of any wealth and so simplistic that there was nothing to steal. And again, we know that the Christian or Catholic preachers, that's what they emphasize, that we have the wealth in our churches, and because God is with us, and look at those, they have nothing there. And we have a few, but very few cases of robberies of Orthodox churches, which obviously had some silver and icons and things like that, but not as many in the materials that I've seen. Of course, silver was stolen, and we do have vaguely referred to that in the document before us. Usually stolen and sold immediately. Often to the Jews, sometimes broken into smaller pieces and then sold. But what also comes across, and very, very frequently, perhaps even more frequently than the silver, is the textiles, the fabrics stolen from the church. So the antependia, the curtains covering altars, the tablecloths covering altars, and we have interesting descriptions of that, and also what happens of that. We talked a little bit about when we talked about the parochet, the pearls were often used, and then it was never sold as a whole thing. The pearls were usually cut off and sold separately, and then the fabric was sold separately. We also know that if there were any golden braids or any ornaments sewn onto the fabric, they would be taken off, sold separately. I haven't seen the use of melting it out for the precious metal. They usually are sold as some other separate item, and then the cloth is sold for reuse, for making gowns, for other things. One interesting case in the town of Przemyśl, a Jew was trying to sell an antependium to Christian women, claiming it was an apron. And they said, no way, it's not an apron, it's too big for an apron. And he was trying to convince them that in fact it was an apron, and they had this conversation that was recorded in the court records. But aside from the question of church robbery, which this text is, it's also, and that's what I would like to focus on, a text about clothing. So let's turn to the text, and the first paragraph essentially summarizes the case. What happened and why the court is concerned with the case. A case of the Reverend in God priest Joachim Rodecki, the guardian of the whole monastery of the Reverend Fathers, this is page 103, of Fathers Bernardines of Brześć, of the Order of St. Francis Ordinis Minoris, against the infidel Wolf Jewłowicz and his son Israel Wolfowicz, and other Jews, arrendators and citizens of the city of His Highness, the King, Brześć, accused by name and known, and stating according to the summons that the accused infidel Jews, traitors and enemies of the faith, nation and the Roman Catholic Church, having violated the supreme divine church and lay laws, knowing that the Honorable Lady Poche, wife of the then treasurer of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, had left this world and was buried with great splendor and at great senatorial expense in the year 1717 on the first day of month May in the monastery of the Reverend Bernardine Fathers of Brześć, who are appearing here before us. So the case ends up in the highest instance court 2 years after the funeral, but also two years after the crime. So the next day after the funeral, at night, having dug into the crypt under the Bernardine church of the plaintiffs, and having found inside the coffin of the above-mentioned honorable lady, draped in the cloth of gold, sumptuously decorated with golden braids and silver studs, they found also quite a few other silver church objects specified in a special list, and I didn't see the list in the document, in the volume that was printed in 1902. There was no list included. Perhaps it survived in Vilna in the archive. Perhaps it hasn't. I don't know that. And having thievishly stripped the coffin and thrown the body out of it, they took everything. And they also chopped and destroyed the coffin, and having removed the silver studs from it, they melted them. And of the cloth and the golden braids with which the coffin was draped, they made bodices and skirts, as it was revealed evidently in the year 1718, so a year later, when the daughters of the accused criminals were seen walking wearing the cloth of gold and bodices with the gold-plated braids. So they waited a year, they made clothes,
That's
and
the real reason for sumptuary law.
and the way the crime was discovered is that the girls were seen wearing the dresses out of this very unusual cloth and bodices made with the ornaments of the braids, the gold-plated braids.
Crosses on them as well.
I would think it's braid, not braids.
Okay.
Yeah, gold braid.
Gold braid.
It's whatever is like sewn on those.
Right.
Yeah.
But
It's a trim.
it's you know when I first read it, I thought you were talking about.
No. Okay, it's a linguistic thing. Thank you. It's my English, which were well marked from the studs. So also, where they were attached to the coffin, there were little holes from the studs, which again gave it further away. And after they were noticed, they hid the clothing. And moreover, the goldsmith who melted the studs publicly declared that they were from the coffin. And there was an uproar in their school, synagogue, so the Jewish community clearly was very unhappy about what had happened. And an order from the elders of the synagogue was sent to return the stolen goods. But the defendants, fearing neither these orders nor punishments from the honorable hetman of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, did not return the stolen goods, and they didn't even promise to return them, and they even impudently blustered out with threats.
That kind of Jews.
So then there is this whole process. The Jewish community tries to force them to return these things. They refuse. They eventually flee the town, and the case is brought against the Jewish community because they are being held responsible for the crime. And then the text continues. A protestation delivered. This is towards the end of the fourth line from below, from the bottom on 104. A protestation delivered to the appropriate office and released her extractum about the break-in to the crypt under the Bernardine church located in Brest, about throwing out bodies of the deceased, and it's in plural, as if they had thrown out many bodies, stripping and destroying the coffin placed in the grave, stealing silver and the gold cloth of gold, and about damages with 3,000, I guess, worth 3,000 zloty, and moreover the registry of church silver and other ornaments around the coffin. After producing this protestation against the defendant Jews for the damages in this matter, the court orders, according to the law, that the reparation from for the stolen church silver and other ornamentation from the coffin, and they repeat this. It's a very repetitive document. The Jews don't respond to it, and then essentially the order is that in order to get the money back, there is an arrest placed on all the movable and immovable goods of the Jewish community until they either force these criminals back to pay responsibility or pay for the. So that's the end. That's not the end, I think, of the case. 3 years later, we have in this castle Acta Grodzkie and the castle records of the court of Brześć, a record of privilege that had originally been issued in 1679, but the Jewish community of Brześć makes sure that it is re-inscripted in the Acta in 1723, 3 years after the case, in which senior Jews of different places in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania appealed to me, that is the king, concerning the burgeoning among the Jewish nation of the power of such Jews who harm both nobility and other Christians. Because of those there is a fierce rancor against all Jews. Therefore we desire that each Jew guilty of crime to be punished with the knowledge of Jewish elders, and after the execution of the punishment, the elders shall be allowed to exclude the criminal from their community, and if such an excluded individual should commit further damage, no other Jew would be punished for him, but instead such accused should be held responsible individually. And with the knowledge of the royal court, all Jewish elders in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and cities, towns, and areas belonging to us, the church or the secular lords, will be allowed to punish dice players, criminals, other malefactors according to their crimes, and to exclude them from their communities. And if such a person were to serve as a witness against Jews, his testimony will not be valid. So they tried to do something so that they would not be then responsible for criminal activity of other Jews. Now, what is again interesting here is that this use and reuse of the textiles, and they have no problems. Clearly this family has no problems of taking it out of this tomb and remaking into clothes and wearing it later on in public. Again, what trips them up is the fact that it's worn and is recognized. Perhaps if they moved to another town it would have been okay. There are a number of other cases of Jews or Christians wearing each other clothes or using textiles, and we talked about it. You were talking about how it's the use of it that makes a certain piece of cloth holy or not, or sacred. So this is an interesting case where that these boundaries sort of are moved and are crossed. We have again, as I mentioned, a number of other cases in which textiles or clothes were stolen, remade into other clothing. In Lublin in 1664, as a thief stole clothes and took them to a Jewish tailor, who then either remade them or sold them elsewhere. We do have instances. So if this case is about Jews wearing these clothes made of this material stolen from a church, or we do have a number of cases, perhaps more than this, of Christians wearing Jewish clothes, or clothes stolen from Jews or borrowed from Jews, as the case may be. The first one is the Responsum 86 from Masad Binyamin by Benjamin Slonik, and this is taken. I didn't have access. I don't know where I lost somewhere a copy of the original first edition, but this is not the original wording of the text. In the actually in the Bar-Ilan responsa, and that I changed because that would be really, it says Sha'ala Ishmaelim Sha'alim. Muslims are asking from Jews clothing. There are no Muslims in Poland to ask Jews clothing. It's clearly it's the and we know that from the first edition that it's Akum, I believe, in the first edition. Akum Sha'alim, the ideologist Sha'alim, asking from Jews clothes and jewelry, and again the same wording here with the churches, but tefillot is probably tefillotam. It's not that, but the point is here you have a case where Christians are borrowing clothes from Jews to go to church on their holidays, and the responsum deals with the question whether he really goes into the question of idolatry more than anything else, but in the end allows the practice for reasons that the clothes are not required for worship by Christians. It's just done because they want to do it. It's not that that serves their idols. So this is one of the examples of that sort of exchange. The other two texts that I wanted to bring to you are ones that I recently found in the archives, and are just about other robberies and the Christian robbers stealing from Jews and using or reusing or re-tailoring clothes or materials found by Jews. So one is 1625 case against 4 Christians who had robbed Jewish merchants near the town of Helm, and I'm sorry, Chmiel, not Helm. And let's move to the English translation. Third of the accused, there were 4 of them, Stanislav Guy or Gajek, called by both names, asked where he lived. And this is, you get a sense of what these materials are and the way how they are recorded. Responded on Dananskie. Asked about Muchayer, which is a satin fabric, responded, Herlinsky came to me and said, brother, there are a few pieces of Muchayer, we robbed Jews in the forest. Ran away and left the fabric in the forest, but I don't know about it. Asked where he got the hat he's wearing because it's Jewish. Responded that Dwuski gave it to him. Asked what his occupation was. Responded that he worked at the Jewish butcher's stalls, where he was kozop, and I couldn't find the exact word in the various sections or looked up. But given the 2 parts of it, it seems that it's the one who removes skin from slaughter. I don't know whether there is a Skinner. Okay.
The Skinner. Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't Skinner. Okay.
Skinner, but you might have to say of slaughtered animals.
Okay.
So people know.
Asked if he frequently worked with thieves. Responded, I did not know that they engaged in this job because they were never imprisoned for it. And then the 4th accused comes, Joannes, Wisienka, Wiśniowski, or Szypowski, named with diverse names. Again, they were changing names and appearing under different names, not unusual. Asked if he was present at the robbery, as they charged him, confessed that he was there at the time when Jews were robbed near Chmiel, that is a week ago. Asked if the shorts, woolen fabric, also could be woolen skirt, was taken at the time. Responded at the time, so it was taken at the time. How much money? Asked how much money he took from Jews during the robbery. Confessed, I was present when Gajowski took money from the Jews. I only took a cloak. There were 4 of us at the time. 1 Dwuski, Jasiek, Gajewski, and I, the 4th. Asked if he sold any of the they sold any of the stolen things. Responded that Gajewski gave me to sell. That is 1 silver pipe and the other golden. And I don't know what the silver pipe may have been, or the golden one, the Tefka is. Asked when they robbed the Jews. I responded around dawn near Chmiel. Asked about Twill, Trelich, and Jewish books and other, not a few things which they took from Jews, namely money about 40 zloty. He did not admit to anything. And then they go on about, and the next one comes. Rybak confessed under torture that one of my sisters is a seamstress and another is a butcher, and that's a female who is a butcher. Pulled Tractus for the 3rd time, confessed that my wife has a dress made of the Jewish dress, confessed that Gajek knows that all the things because he was selling them, confessed he is wearing the Jewish jacket. So again, this is confessed, so they are asking him, what are you wearing? This is the jacket we stole from Jews. And you can again, you can see they often just stole things and put them immediately on themselves, and then used them. The next text is another case. It's 3 years later. A case of a Jew, Yakov Zagiera, against a woman, Katarina Rogulszczyna, the wife of a certain Albert Rogula. She is in court because he was robbed and the stolen items were found in her possession, and the case involves her husband. Presently, the above-mentioned Katarina Rogulszczyzna was questioned by the court whether she knew of stolen things that Kwiatkowski and other things would bring to her husband. So he also was a dealer in stolen property. Responded that only now did I find out when this Jew was looking for his loss. But I suspected that these were Jewish things from which he, that is her husband, had a costume, żupan, made. And żupan is a very specific thing. That's the kind of clothes. It's traditionally thought to have been worn by the nobles. I mean, that's why you had it, exactly. So this is what he is, whatever they stole from the Jews, that's what he had made for himself. Asked how long has her husband been taking stolen things, responded, it's been about a year, that my husband had problems with this thief, and it was around the time when the tribunal met. And the tribunal in Lublin, this is in Lublin, not in, met from the first Sunday following Easter, so the first Sunday after Easter, and then lasted till more or less the St. Bartholomew Day, that is no longer than August 24th. So it's in that sort of spring, summertime. But I told my husband not once not to engage in thievery, but he would beat me up a lot so that I would not nag him. Asked where the Jewish robes are, responded that my husband sold them in Krakowskie Przedmieście, and the second was retailered. And he also took robes from this thief. Asked if she also took robes from this thief, responded that I did not, only my husband. Asked if her husband stole, responded she did not know, she did not see. Asked how long this thief frequented her husband, responded about a year ago. He was there for 2 days, and this year he was for about 3, and so on and so forth. So again, there are stealing. There are sometimes immediately wearing the clothes that they steal from Jews. Sometimes they are remaking them, whether we don't know whether because they look different or whether because they are too big, they are too small, they don't want to sell. It's very tricky in these records to assume that something might have been Jewish, or if the word Jewish is used, that it was necessarily different from anything else, because the adjective was simply used often by possession. Jewish, that is that of Jews, or if it was owned by a certain Paweł, it would be called czapka pawłowska, the pulse as an adjective hat. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's any particular kind. We have evidence, and Ted has shown in his book, in certain regions that Jews did wear different clothes, but we also have a number of takanot, communal ordinances complaining that Jews are not wearing different clothes, that they wear clothes and dress like Christians. The fact that they are exchanging here and borrowing clothes from Jews to go to church suggests that it was nicer, perhaps. It was not shameful Jewish in any way. And so again, there were certainly in some areas, and in some documentaries suggest that there were differences, but there's also a lot to suggest that they were dressing in similar manner and reusing each other's clothes. And I'll stop here so we have time for discussion.
Well, I thought it was particularly interesting in the first case that the young women, they thought that if they waited a year to wear these lavish
I mean, very lavish clothes, that nobody would recognize them. I mean, and right there, that would be an example that the clothes of Jews were just as lavish as the clothes of people in the town that weren't Jewish.
It could be that.
Could be.
I didn't
mean,
think
and
of
that's
that.
something that's really interesting because it says they waited a year, like people would forget what had happened at the funeral.
Right.
And then that they could proceed. these
Well,
lavish-
the holes from the studs are giving them away, right? It's
Yes.
But it was also
But the studs were
they didn't
formed.
know.
But I also thought the studs maybe, I can't read the Polish, but I also thought the studs may be the studs that are on the clothes, because it says that the clothes are adorned.
but they take them away because they smelted them so that they would have the silver.
Studs held it into the coffin.
So the studs were, the nails were silver, were holding it to the coffin. They removed it, melted it. They took it to the same goldsmith to melt, and he says, I made those. They are certainly from that coffin. And then,
One can imagine that the father stole this stuff, or the father and son stole it and hid it in a closet. And these two teenage girls go into the closet and say, look what we found! Oh! Steal it from their father, go to the goldsmith because they're too stupid to know what they look. I mean, I'm saying it facetiously, but in fact, you never really know.
you don't know. It may have been that they stole the cloth, held it, and then said to the family, to the girls, look, we have this beautiful cloth, make yourself nice bodices and nice dresses. They make themselves nice dresses and then walk around, and then someone says, hey, a year ago there was this fancy funeral, and look at those halls. So
Are there any indications before the girls come out wearing the dresses that someone was upset about the tomb desecration?
it doesn't seem. It seems that then raises question, and then that's when the crime is discovered. Maybe there are some testimonies. Again, maybe someone will find it sometime in Vilna if it survived. I don't know whether it survived. I think the Brześć acta were destroyed during the war. That's all I have. But from this text appears that that's what.
It's almost as if the issue of the clothing is more important than the tomb being desecrated, which is really interesting.
No, it's just that the evidence that then they discovered that it was stolen, and discovered there was other things being stolen from that the body was taken out of the coffin was disassembled, and things like that, and then they are taken to court for this crime.
The crime is stealing, not a tomb desecration.
That's right, but it's sacrilege because it's from the church.
Right.
Right, and here it's interesting because in this case you have that religious language entering the thing. You don't have it in other cases where Jews are criminals, but here perhaps because it involves the church, and that you have that there are traitors, enemies of the faith, Roman Catholic Church violated the divine laws and things like that. So you have this religious.
I'd like to maybe turn the discussion a little bit to the issue that you're raising about whether or not Jews everywhere dress differently and whether people saw clothes as specifically Jewish or not. And I want to raise it from the other side. There's actually, if I'm correct about this, there's actually no real justification for a Jewish kehillah expropriating money from its members. In other words, there's no legal theory that justifies expropriation unless one of the ways that they create a justification is to argue that it's that it is a moment of catastrophe, it's a moment of emergency, therefore we can create, in effect, a government which will then have the authority to pass takanot, which are binding on people, and so forth. And one of the earliest examples of this that I know is, if I remember correctly, it's 932, but it's medieval, and it's northern Spain. And it's a case where a group of people in a community decide to appoint somebody as their leader. And they say that the reason we're doing this is that the young Jewish kids are dressing like gold, right? And therefore this is absolutely unacceptable, and we therefore need somebody to whom we will grant the authority to impose regulations. And I've always understood this text. First of all, I've always understood it as a made-up reason. And that, in fact, what they're looking for is a justification for establishing a governmental authority. I think also in Fort Lee, I think the meeting where they talk about sumptuary laws and also are making an effort to create communal authority in places where they say quite clearly it hadn't existed before. I think, again, this business about controlling clothing becomes an excuse. So the question would be, not so much looking at it from the side of the Christian courts or the general courts judging whether people are stealing clothes from Jews and things like that, but whether in fact Jews, how much pressure you find within communities to insist that Jews dress separately from or differently from the outside.
I mean, the only thing that I find is in church legislation from that period of time.
That's the other side.
That's the other side. I mean, also from within the Jewish community, you have that the community is insisting that Jews are not wearing clothes. They enter Jewish Christian houses. That they try to say, well, you have to dress Jewishly in some ways, and clearly this is not going on. And then you have that meshed with the material that is also, they're really not dressing that differently. Again, Ted has a couple of responses that he mentions, and I think in his book, and I think they covered the Western territory, if I remember correctly, of Poland, the Wielkopolska, the Great Poland, where there is an indication of the Jews wearing different clothes, and then that they can wear non-Jewish clothes when they travel because that's dangerous to dress as Jews. But the vast majority of the materials that you see from either side is complaints that they are by the authorities of both communities, that Jews are not dressing differently, distinctly, or these like matter-of-fact statements that something was stolen, I'm wearing it, or there's that. It's clearly that these things were passing hands without this sort of consciousness of religious significance or religious boundaries that these items were had. Everything had value. I think that's what it is. That everything had value, and everything that was stolen or reappropriated, or remade, could be either resold or worn in this things, and we see it on all levels of society. We see the clothes being passed on the highest levels. We have, I'm sure it's not only in Poland, but there are a few cases I've seen where there are actually court cases over a dress. There was a guy whose wife died, and his second wife wears the clothes of the deceased wife, and the children are suing the father, outraged that the second wife is wearing the clothes of their mother, and it's supposed to be their inheritance. So you have that aspect of the thing. Yeah.
Rachel.
Two things. Briefly, that in terms of wearing them after a year, and the possibilities are just endless. You think about the first World Trade Center bombing, people would return the van, right? Immediately used the van to bomb the World Trade Center, then took it back to the rental place and tried to return it. So the sort of chutzpah people.
Not the worst.
The first attempt.
So I mean, the possibilities are just endless. But I'm fascinated. We're talking about crossing borders between Jews and Christians in clothing. I'm really taken by taking the clothes from a grave and then putting them on. Given the folklore that we have from Jewish community, obviously this is just one family, so it's very hard to say anything about community. You can always think one family that doesn't share a mentality, but the stories and the Yiddish stories about the dead and the living and the haunting and all kinds of things. And not just put it on the roof. I mean,
Business is business.
Well, I'm wondering, I mean,
Maybe they felt a year would get rid of that. Maybe that was part of the.
Don't forget, they did remake the clothes.
Well, because it was cloth, because it was textiles wrapped, so they had to remake it.
Because Jewish graves don't contain these kind of items, it's very hard to compare. One would suggest but I'm wondering if there's some sort of dehumidification almost of the Christian person who died is not being regarded as I wonder, in terms of Jews and Christians and there being no borders, I'm wondering if it's not actually an indication that's very, like I said, it's hard to compare because you can't look about whether you, to doesn't exist in that.
You don't have 100 cases like this.
No.
Something that is ritually impure.
It's nothing to do with the clothing.
But that's the question.
Nothing
I mean, they
to do
clearly, but they moved the body, right? Because they disassembled the coffin to take the silver
They
nails
throw
from
the
it.
body out of it.
So we don't have. They clearly didn't take the clothes she was wearing, because there's nothing in this document that says that they took off her clothes and left her naked. So they clearly, it appears that they haven't. That they took everything around it, the silver objects from the church that were then discovered, the drapery, the ornaments and things like that. So
They took the coffin, too.
took apart the
Right.
coffin.
But it's in that particular text, there's no indication of whether, there's no evidence for whether Jews wore similar or different clothes, because they made clothes out of fabric.
No,
So that's-
what I wanted to bring in is that there is this crossing of these very religious boundaries of not only breaking into the church and taking fabric from the church, but actually breaking into a tomb and taking the, and it's nice that you've articulated, I didn't want to articulate that explicitly, but that exactly it, that there is no sort of, as Seth says, business is business, that there is no sort of sense of some, well, we shouldn't go that far and then make it into clothes, or let's just steal it and sell it in another town. But no, they keep it and then they make it into their own clothes for the family. I mean, that's the thing, that it was, they held it. They didn't just do it for money, they did it for this cloth. So that's the thing in terms of the, yes, it's unclear whether they were different, but it's the boundary crossing religious into a different religious space, very loaded religious space. And then here you have the flip side, where you have the Christians wearing Jewish clothes to a church. And the question coming up whether Jews facilitate idol worship by lending them these clothes. So you have these two groups that are going into these spaces, and clothing is this medium that is in both spaces. And then the other cases I just brought in for you to see that these things could have been easily worn and switched. Interesting, we talked about one point about boots, because we talked about shoes, and I found cases where they steal boots, but not because they actually want the boots, but because people keep money in boots. So they say, oh, we stole them because we thought there was going to be money in the boots. So that's kind of the Miriam and Adam. Oh, Vivian. No.
No, I just talking about crossing boundaries, but before that, I wanted to say something to Bernardine. It's not just the matter that the clothes issue is an excuse to set up a government in the Kehillah, because in Spain, for example, as I'm sure in other places, and I'm not a historian, it was the Kehillah that had to collect the taxes. And so by toning down what people were showing off in public, they could, I think, in some way ameliorate the tax situation.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. In this particular document, that's not part of it, but I agree with your brother.
Okay. The other thing I want to say is there's this famous tshuva from Spain in which Jews break into a synagogue and steal the silver finials in Daroca. And so the boundaries were very
Sure.
loose.
Miriam. Miriam, you have a question?
Well, in a way, I think my question has been answered. But I wonder about you're talking about specific cases in which Jews and non-Jews are involved, but what about, you don't hear about Christian grave robberies?
That's the thing, that I haven't seen cases. I see church robberies by Christians.
I mean, obviously, you
But-
wouldn't have Christian robberies of Jewish graves because there's nothing to take out of it, but the other way around.
I haven't seen it in the court records. I've seen they haven't. They are not tried for this. It doesn't come up. I don't know why. It could be that in the regular, like just the regular people who are buried with nothing because they are poor or whatever. But those who are buried in churches, maybe I haven't. No, the sort of scene from Pasolini's the Cameron, it just doesn't doesn't come up in these things. Now, it could be that when they rob churches, that they rob something from the tombs there, but it's not explicitly mentioned. But
I think we're reading backwards from present day. If you look at the records of what has been dug up in Spain, for example, jewelry was buried with people.
With Jews.
Uh-huh. Silver jewelry.
Yeah, I mean, the whole question of differences in clothing is a very difficult question to apologize, partly because we don't have so little iconographic material to work with. You have all kinds of references. Jews constructed their identity by the fact that they were wearing clothes that their ancestors had brought from outside Poland. And Wolochow in his autobiography says, when we came to Poland, we kept our ancestors' clothing and we dressed that way. So the Jews are using it to construct their own identity.
right, but on the other hand, the few images that we have don't indicate that Jews were in a different, whether in terms of the clothing and the urban.
If you look at your sources, one thing I think is that Marsha sort of brought out is that what's stolen is in fact textiles that are remade into different clothes.
Not always.
Only the thieves in the second text are actually putting on Jewish clothes, and that brings up another issue, which is the question of social margins. We're talking about marginal people here, and in the social margins, all the kind of boundaries that you're talking about, they don't exist there, which means that if we think of clothes being used to construct boundaries, which is really, I think, sort of what we're coming for, people are using, Bernie talked about, people are using clothes to construct boundaries. If we look at the boundaries through the clothes, then we're accepting the world view of the people who are constructing the boundaries using the clothes. I'm sorry to be very, very complex. But what it does mean is that it could be that for the people making the takanot, the authorities, the anxiety of mixing is huge. Whereas as you go down the social scale, that anxiety simply either doesn't exist or isn't half as strong. And so if we say, no, these are crossing boundaries, what you're saying is, I accept that the definition of boundaries made by the people making the takanot.
No, you're absolutely right. That we end up, and we're sort of tied up in this language of those who wanted to set those boundaries. Right. But these people, that's what I was trying to say, that there doesn't appear to be self-consciousness about this on this. For those people, that's right. For those people, exactly, this is much more blurred, and it's not crossing those. Now, spaces entering a church, and that's a crossing of a boundary. But we do have something, and I didn't bring it up. We have a number of these sort of off-the-cuff sort of statements. I don't know whether he was a Jew or a Christian in these court records that are not necessarily, these criminals wearing Jewish clothes, but just sort of witnesses saying, I don't know. So there is clearly something that this distinction is much less obvious at the time, and it probably differs by region and from
east you go,
or the size of the Jewish community might matter as well. Whether you have a larger urban setting and a large Jewish community, whether you have elsewhere.
And just one last thing to Bernie. I don't know about the document you talked about from the 10th century, but later on the community is constructed as a form of court, as Jewish court, and that's what gives it its authority over the people. Not kind of anxiety of boundary. You want to correct me? I mean,
no, in the Ashkenazic world, in the Ashkenazic world, that's precisely correct. It's hefker beit din hefker.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they use. The right of the court. The court has the right to take money or assets of anyone and declare them to be the court's property.
Yeah.
That's the Ashkenazic form.
Right, and in fact, there is a difference between Ashkenazic and Sephardic, and that even in the Ashkenazic case, the idea of hefker is something that's used, for instance, for collecting taxation and things like that.
But that's the basis of the community.
No, but there are other elements that the community is involved in, for instance, eliminating strangers, keeping people out, and you get the problem of whether that's allowed. And
that's chazakah. Right, that's chazakah. That's a gemara.
Chazakah is a very problematic idea. It's an extreme. I mean, they argue about it endlessly.
In the 11th century, they don't have such a big problem. But that's
they do. You're wrong. They do.
Benu Gershon doesn't have a problem because the Gemara in Bava Batra.
But you're absolutely wrong because in fact the justification for it is. I mean, we can look at the text, but
he leads Paula, and then we're going to have to cut because we're going to run out of tape. So
I wanted to ask you about this also give the purity or what clothes can embody. Did you find any restrictions either between Jews and Jews, or Christians and Christians, or Jews and Christians? What type of clothes were taboo to lend or reuse, or are all clothes open for secondhand use?
It seems like everything was open for second-hand use from the kind of sources I've seen. The only thing that I've seen in terms of distinction, but that's in my mind an issue of competition, economic competition, where you have municipal restrictions where they say Jewish tailors should only satisfy Jewish needs and Christian tailors Christian needs. But again, it's in the context of competition. So obviously there are halachic issues regarding clothing. So that's obvious, but I don't think that whether Christian authorities are dealing with this. These are Jewish needs, and therefore, we don't care. It's more of an issue of competition.
You can actually protect your loved one, your Christian loved one, by clothing her in shatnez.
Who knows? Who knows whether Christians were buying clothes from Jewish tailors because of that, or because they were cheaper outside of the guilds, whatever things. I mean, we have Jews binding missiles that really get some authorities outraged. These things happen, but it's about competition.
They were doing everything. They were
Yeah.
making chalices, they were making crosses, they were painting
Exactly.
pieces.
Exactly.
Paula, and then
Well, this is just going back to a final detail in your 1625 case that I think really puts the point on the issues that you were raising about how these sort of decrees from on high don't exist on the margins. I mean, if we look at our friend Stanislaus, thief number 3, I mean, Stanislaus is a skinner. I mean, he belongs to this dishonorable classes, right? Skinners, tanners, executioners, grave diggers. And there's a whole sort of ritualistic culture that also involves material, what one wears, etc., about legislating about those dishonorable professions. Kathy Stewart wrote a wonderful book on this some years ago using the records from places like Augsburg, but they're all over the place, right, in Europe in this period, and I would imagine in both Eastern as well as Western, you could find aspects. So, again, the sort of nature of who these people are. And I thought that was interesting when I was reading that. The question I had for you was that in this instance, it did seem like, asked where he got the hat he's wearing because it is Jewish, that in that instance, that case, the hat was Jewish. But no.
See, the language is, pytany kiedy tę czapkę wziął, która na nim jest żydowska. It could be because it belonged to a Jew.
So,
that's the problem with it.
A little differently into English because right now it sounds like
and I chose to use the adjective. I chose to use the adjective because that's the adjective chosen. Because I didn't want to, in fact, impose the meaning that it belongs to a Jew by saying, well, we don't. So I might do the Jew's hat. That might be the best sort of solution to that. But it could just mean that it belongs to that Jew who claims that I was being robbed. Look, he's wearing my hat. So.
But really, I wanted to make that larger point about once we get into these kinds of criminal records, this is a world that's all mixed up in which everything is possible.
The only one thing that I said, last sentence, is that I don't see such distinctions and impositions on the various classes of clothing. I mean, yes, the burghers will wear more sumptuous, but with the prostitutes or the hangmen or whatever executioners were wearing that doesn't seem to appear in Poland. So
okay,
thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to reconvene in 15 minutes for the round table.